Okay. So what I'm going to talk about is give you some thoughts and advice on networking, marketing yourself. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I have an industry background, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how the big companies recruit. We're going to talk about assessment centers and key skills. I'm going to talk about the current situation, especially with COVID. And I'm going to mention how I have managed to find work over the years, principally through networking. And then I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about what are my soft skills, developing on some of the things from a couple of the earlier talks, how we can find out about those and how we can work on them. So my career has, as some of you can probably see from the picture, I am one of the older people in just described. I've been working in science for about 30 or 40 years now. It's taken me from school through education at Edinburgh and Cambridge, working at the oil company British Petroleum, doing R&D, lubricants, technology strategy, a mid-career degree in business and economics at London Business School, since when I have been freelancing for the last 25 years, which means the home-based working that most of you will have done the last year or so, I've been doing for all that time. And during that time, I've managed to get something over 500 paid assignments in the UK and beyond. And you can see from the little map in the middle where some of my clients are. So some of you may be interested in non-academic careers, big companies. And through last year, I was talking to a number of PhD students and they're saying, we don't know what's happening with industry. We don't know what's happening with recruitment. All the interviews are drying up. And the reason was this, that big companies typically like to have group interviews. They will select from probably hundreds of CVs they get, cohorts of something like 10, 15, possibly 20, and they'll bring them into things called assessment centers. There they will do psychometric testing, they will give people role play exercises, team challenges, aptitude tests and interviews. And this is very widely used by people in business. It's also used by the military a lot. It's used by NGOs, it's used by government for recruiting people to the fast stream of the civil services. I think Sarah's just said those kind of interviews are my absolute worst nightmare. And I'll see if I can break that down. One of the things that I would say is very, very useful, there is a thing called the Belbin test. You can find this online. If you hate working with people in these kind of team exercises, I know it's all redolent of some of the worst TV programs. One of the things you can do is find out what your Belbin test says about you. Your Belbin test is something that gives a view on what kind of role that you like to play when confronted with a group exercise. You'll hear people talk about shapers who like to start and drive things on. You'll hear people talk about completer finishers who like to do the detail. It's extraordinarily useful to know what your Belbin profile is. It's a page test, but if you go on to Google the Belbin test, you'll find a Wikipedia page which will take you through the various roles, and you should be able to work out what you are and, more importantly, what you're not. Now, let's think about skills. Traditionally, we talk about hard skills and soft skills. I like to split that a little bit, and so do most businesses I know. There's the technical skills. So as researchers, as scientists, you know about your specialism and the important ways that your specialism interacts with the rest of the world. It's context. We can then talk about functional skills that let me do things and interpersonal skills. So what do we mean by that? Putting my knowledge into context. I talk to people and say, so tell me about yourself. And the first thing they say is something like, I'm a PhD student. And I say, okay, fine. What are you working on? I'm developing metabolic algorithms. That's interesting. Can you tell me why you're doing that? Well, okay. We can predict blood sugar levels ahead of insulin injection. Okay, that sounds interesting. What will that do for people? Well, actually, there are 5 million people with diabetes in the UK. Before COVID, it was the fastest growing cost in the whole of the NHS. And by developing a good algorithm, we could change the lives of those 5 million people. That's what I call putting your knowledge into context. Why should anyone be interested in your work? Finding how your work interacts with other people's work is extraordinarily useful and extraordinarily important. If you can do that, it's essential to be able to do that with your own research. It's really, really useful to, beyond that, to have a picture of how science as a whole interacts with what we might call the real world. And companies like to test this out by asking you little sort of problematic questions. There's an example on the slide. It's a summer's day in Scotland and the Sahara. It's June, okay? We have two sets of identical photovoltaic cells, which provides the most energy. Now, what they're not interested in is lots of calculations. What they're absolutely not interested in is, I have no idea, or that's physics and I'm a chemist. What they're interested in is your sort of thought process. You could say, well, we're talking about the energy. The Sahara gets the most sunlight, but I have an idea that there might be a trick question, because in Scotland, we'd have a 15 hours of daylight. It might be that those two things cancel each other out, okay? Being good at stuff like that is really interesting for recruiters. If you like questions like that, that comes from a quiz that's on my company website. It's called Science in the Real World Quiz, and the link is below. Right? So that's your science skills. Functional skills. What are functional skills? It's things like, can you drive a car? Or an HGV, they're in absolute short supply at the moment. Do you have craft skills? Can you do metalwork, glass blowing? Do you have language skills? Do you know about some business things like project management? Can you generate a budget? Do you know the difference between capital expenditure and revenue expenditure? These things are useful to have, and they can be interesting for specific jobs. But generally with big companies, what they'll tend to do is they will train you in a lot of this stuff. If you go and work for a large company, you will certainly be trained in how we do budgets. You will certainly be trained in project management. But then there's the third group of skills, the interpersonal skills. And the reason that companies have these assessment activities is they want to see you doing these kind of things in a group activity. Can you communicate with other people? Can you interact with other people? Can you help other people? Can you work on big problems? Can you put things into context? Can you explain things to people? If you look at the Belbin test, key kind of skills that they're looking for are skills generally demonstrated by coordinators and research investigators. And it turns out that this is not just key skills for big companies. These are actually the key skills demonstrated by the really top academic researchers. A few years ago, I was at a conference. The lady in the picture, who's the Dean of Graduate Education at MIT, gave a talk. How do you get to be a professor at MIT? And what she said was, your publication record gets you the interview, your personal skills get you the job. And that's absolutely what business interviewers say. Your degree from a good university gets you the interview. It's your interpersonal skills that get you the job. And the skills that she commented on were exactly the same skills that I had presented in a similar talk at the conference, which was what companies say they want. If you want to know, if you want to find out and quantify to some extent your aptitude and your inclinations, there are a number of good tests out there. And it may well be that the careers department at your university has some of these things. The one that I'm most familiar with is something called the Highland Battery Test. It does two things, two sets of questions. One is it has what we call the whole person process. It reveals the kind of jobs that you would like to do. My eldest daughter did this when she crashed out of university and was working at Starbucks. One of her key likes was, I really like solving problems. I really like sorting things out. I like sorting people out, which was very useful because the Starbucks she was working in was in quite a, as the Scots say, a couthy and interesting part of Glasgow. And then you have aptitude tests, which reveals the jobs you'd be good at. And of course, what you're looking for is the overlap. And this was an extremely interesting exercise for my daughter, because there she was working as a shift supervisor at Starbucks. And the lady in the picture said to my daughter, you do realize you could be an air traffic controller with your skill set and your aptitude. So not all career departments have them, but some do. And that's a good way forward for you. Anyway, what I've said is that at the moment, companies are not doing a lot of recruitment. What that means is that the old way of getting jobs, of waiting for the milk round to come along, sending out CVs, isn't going to work. This happened to me in the middle of my career. I had joined what I thought was a company that had employment for life. In fact, most of the people that joined before me did have employment for life. But halfway through my career, the organization starts to delayer. The R&D department on non-oil projects closes down. That was partly my fault because I'd written a rather damning post-project appraisal. I'd been working BP's lubricants business and they sold that. And so I left voluntarily and spent a year at London Business School, which was my first taste of working from home, which was... you can see a rather younger version of me sitting in my bedroom in our rather small house in central London, picture taken by my wife, who at that point was sitting in bed because she was pregnant. Anyway, so I had a great, interesting time at London Business School, very hard work, good classmates, but I come out right into the middle of a bad recession. Lots and lots of redundancies, lots of restructuring. I think I applied for something like 250 jobs in 2 to 3 years. I got a few interviews, but didn't pick up a job. No one wanted business development experts and researchers. Everyone wanted accountants. However, we had some advice from a career consultant when I was at business school. What to do when you're out of work? Well, he said, the first thing you have to do is get fit, because it really shows when you're in the job interview. Physical fitness really makes the difference to your initial appearance. So yeah, I did that. I cycled from Clapham to Baker Street every day. The next thing he said is, you people, you're all kind of at least middle managers. Don't just sit there replying to other people's job ads. Actively go out and do things, but don't just look for a job, go and look for bits of work. There are lots of people out there with bits of work that need doing, but don't necessarily want a full-time employee. If necessary, do voluntary work to make yourself feel useful and also to build your skills. And so it turned out that my first consultancy assignment came from talking to people at London Business School. They had an Eastern European group. The Eastern European countries were privatizing. Someone from the business school said to me, called me up and said, Kevin, you did an assignment on Eastern Europe. Would you like to go to ex-Yugoslavia? And I said, well, isn't there a war on there? And they said, no, it's all peaceful. Would you like to go to Slovenia? They can't pay you, but they'll give you 3 weeks free board and lodging, and we'll pay your your plane fare. And I said, okay, that's a good deal. I've got no work. That was my first assignment. In the end, I did get paid for that, because one of the things, the company that made the components you can see in the middle two pictures, which are components for air conditioning systems, and remember, I'm an industrial chemist, they said, do you think you could find us some customers in the UK? And I was able to find them some customers, and they paid me some commission. They then passed me on. It turns out that Slovenia, which is a country I can really, really recommend, it's absolutely beautiful. It's full of small industries. They were restructuring very heavily. The rest of Yugoslavia was still having a war. And one of the questions people kept asking me was, hey, could we sell this in Britain? And I started doing bits of work to help them out. And I basically networked my way through Slovenia, talking to small companies and putting them in touch with potential customers in the UK. About 3 years in, I suddenly noticed I was making half my old salary, and I was having a lot of fun. And around that time, I stopped looking for what you might call proper jobs and just started doing consultancy. I'm going to tell some of you more about this in, I think, in a couple of weeks' time. I'll go through my career. Anyway, so what is my marketing strategy? How do I manage to sell myself, sell my consultancy company? Well, I go to conferences and meetings. There are actually only 3 conferences and meetings that are really, really useful to me. They're all in September. And so September traditionally over the last, up until 2020, was the time I went to conferences. And then one of the things I do at conferences is I always ask questions. I tend to sit at the front because I have poor hearing. And I tend to be supportive of the speaker because it can be quite terrifying. And you know, there's that moment at conferences when the host says, are there any questions? And there's a deathly silence, okay? I try to be the person who breaks that deathly silence by asking a question. Usually what I call a clarifying question to confirm that I've understood what the speaker is saying, but something easy for the speaker to answer. Very often I'll get the speaker thanking me personally for that, or the conference organizer thanking me for that later in the day. I then network at the conference to add contacts. I will try to arrange those people and myself to meet either formally or personally or on Zoom these days, and have what I call an informational interview with them, which is, you know, finding out about them, telling them about me. And then I maintain my contact list by doing lots of friendly, helpful things with contacts just to stay in touch. This is where LinkedIn can be useful, right? Dear X, I thought you might be interested in this. Dear Y, hey, there's a job here I think you could apply for. So what is networking? Networking is about building up a group, a database of people that know you, understand what you can do, understand what you want to do, and who will refer you to their contacts, which kind of implicitly means that they basically trust you, right? What it's not an old boys network. It's not cronyism. It is genuinely interacting with people. Now, one of the problems here is that I will have a number of people say, I hate networking. I'm really, really shy. Okay. Well, you may not believe me, but so am I. Okay. I am actually an introvert. You can tell when people are introverts because at the end of the day, talking to at a conference, I literally have to go and sit in my room for half an hour to 45 minutes to decompress. I get people out. I am an introvert, okay? But actually, you can turn being an introvert into a really positive thing. Right? My general strategy is this. One is I practice what I call opening statements. Hello, I'm Kevin. I do this. Okay. Hello, I'm X. I'm at the Royal Society of Edinburgh. I practice closing statements. I practice saying things like, hey, it was really great to meet you. Can I have your business card? Can I call you? Can I link in with you sometime? And there's been a little discussion in the chat about the etiquette of when exactly you do and don't link in with someone. But I would always expect to have had some interaction with people before I interact, before I would actually let them onto my network. My network is precious to me. It's important to me. It's very high quality. Business cards. My aim at a networking meeting is not to give people my business card. I will if you ask me, but I want to get the other person's business card from them. And then in the middle, what I do is this, and I developed this technique early on, I think probably early in my student days when I went to conferences, and I realized that everyone there was much, much more important than me, much, much more senior than me. And at one university, oh my goodness, the vice chancellor came to the network. I found myself talking, you know, as a student next to the vice chancellor. What do I say to them? My technique there is to imagine that I'm interviewing them. I don't say very much. I don't talk about myself. I just ask them questions. Oh, gosh, I've never met a vice chancellor before. What do you do from day to day? What are the things that make your job really kind of challenging or interesting? Do you have any time for things outside? And one of my tips is that people can rarely resist being asked about themselves. And the more important they are, and there is a tendency, especially for us old blokes, we tend to get a bit pompous and we love talking about ourselves. And you don't have to ask a lot of questions to have a really good interaction with people who think you're a splendid young person. Anyway, let's do a few demonstrations. Okay. The first thing I want you to think about is this. How do you describe yourself? And what I would do is go back to the older slide, one of the previous slides, right? Don't just say, I'm a PhD student. That may be literally true, but you're more than that. In the case of the previous example, you can legitimately say, I'm a medical researcher developing metabolic algorithms. Think about how you describe yourself, right? I'm a medical researcher. I'm developing a new way of predicting blood sugar levels in diabetics. I'm a medical researcher. We're trying to change the lives of 5 million diabetics. So think about that in your opening statements. So what I'd like to do, Sammy, if we can set this up, is what I'd like is to put people into breakout sessions. I'd like everyone to at least have their microphones on. I'd like everyone to think of a way of introducing themselves. Okay, so my way of introducing myself would be, hello, I'm Kevin. I'm a freelance consultant with KKR Associates, right? Think about the way you'd like to introduce yourselves, practice that, take it in turns to practice that. And then also, as well, I'd like you to just practice saying, thank you. It was really nice to meet you. Can I have your business card? Okay. Can we join up on LinkedIn? Right. Now, there's two reasons for that polite closer. One is that you generally want to talk to the person and want to get their business card and would like to talk to them later. The other is if you're stuck with the really boring or creepy person, a really good way of getting out of the conversation is saying, "Can I have your business card? Thank you so much. It was lovely to meet you," and disappear. I'll be in touch. Okay. So can we put people into groups? Leave me out of the group, Sammy, but I'll sort of stick my head into people's groups and see how they're doing, if that's all right. And we're only going to do this for probably 3 or 4 minutes. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is this. I said that one of the techniques you can adopt, especially if you're a shy person, is gently interviewing the other person. And this is what I'm going to get you to do in a minute. But I want to do a little bit something else first. Okay. What I'd like you to think about are what are your 3 or 4 things that make you an interesting person. Okay. Are there some stuff out there? Do you have hobbies? Do you have interests? Is your work potentially life-changing? Okay. And we call those your hooks. Okay. Now, I have a number of them, one of which is the one that Sally mentioned, which I blew up a chemistry lab, but I try not to introduce that too often into conversations. But I used to have a job when I literally sold oil, lubricating oils, to the Arabs, okay? I'm a Cub Scout leader. I've spent the last 20 years helping small boys set themselves on fire. I'm a chemist, but I've recently been mentoring some rock musicians funded by the Prince's Trust. And work-wise, I have an interesting statistic, which is roughly 1 in 150 people of the people that I train as students go on to become successful, wealthy, sometimes millionaire technology entrepreneurs. And we do that because it's important to realize that although I may be an introvert, hey, I'm actually quite an interesting person. And then what we do is we try to latch on our hooks to something that the other person has said. So we turn it from being an interview into a conversation. So you listen to the other person. You might have asked them a question about, oh, does your job involve a lot of travel? Oh, yes, I'm just back from Palestine and Jordan. Oh, really? I used to sell oil to the Arabs there. Oh, you've just done some work with young people. I do some stuff with the Prince's Trust. Oh, you're a musician. And this brings me on to a short anecdote. A few years ago at a conference, there was a keynote speaker who had just sold his technology. It was an IT security company for £350 million. At the end of the conference, he was surrounded by lawyers and accountants, all trying to thrust their business cards at him. I let the poor man have a break, and I decided to read in the conference brochure all about him. And there at the bottom, it says, X, X likes to find when they can some time to play their electric guitar. So that's interesting, because I play the guitar. Not very well, but I play the guitar. At the end of all these people milling around him, as the crowds dispersed, it was the coffee break, I went up to him and just said, so what kind of guitar do you play? And he said, how do you know I play the guitar? I said, it's in the conference brochure. Oh, is that still there? Well, it's this. And if any of you play the guitar or know people that can play the guitar, you can talk for hours about guitars. We talk for guitars for 35 minutes. At the end of that, he said, so you're at this conference, what do you do? Oh, well, I train researchers in business skills. Oh, really? He said, you must come and talk to us, right? Because we'd already brought up that rapport. Okay? So what I'd like you to do now is to think about what are your 3 or 4 hooks that might make you interesting to other people? And I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. And then what I'm going to do is we're going to go into the breakout rooms in pairs this time. And what's going to happen is you're going to take it in pairs, take it in turns. One of you will gently interview the other person, and your aim is to find out what their hooks are. And your aim is to do that by asking them lots of open-ended questions about their life, their background, what they do now. And after about, I will send a message to all the breakout rooms, and after about 5 minutes, we will get you to swap over, okay? So 2 minutes now, or 30 seconds, because we've had a minute or so. Can we all write down the 3 or 4 things that make ourselves interesting? Okay. I was in a few rooms there, and I observed and overheard conversations, which all seemed very interesting. So I don't know how you all felt. You could put comments up, but that's the basic process, right? Don't think of it as networking as such. Think of it as, gosh, I'm going to meet some really interesting people, and they're going to think I'm interesting as well. Now, there are some times where you might actually want to target a specific person because you've identified, you see this in Dragon's Den sometime, you know, the entrepreneurs say, we'd really like to work with X. Because you've identified someone you'd really like to network with at the conference. So one of the things you can do there is use LinkedIn to do your homework on them. Now, here's an interesting person that I know particularly well. And she is a chemist who became a very senior accountant. And if I look through her history, it says, yes, University of Edinburgh chemistry. So one of the questions I could ask her when I'm talking to this lady, who is extremely important, is, you're a chemist, aren't you? How come you got into accountancy? Did you find transferable skills? And then I noticed that she became a partner in what is now a pretty big national firm, Binder Hamlin, now BDO. You know, was that usual in the late 1980s? Was that, you know, perhaps this person was a pioneer? So you can ask those kind of questions. Now, what we're trying to do when we meet someone, I mean, when I meet people at conferences, I never try to sell to them. I never try to thrust my business cards at them. I let them understand what it is I do a little bit, and I try and understand what they do. And what I try to get out of the meeting at the conference is, can I have a chat with you sometime? Can I talk to you? Whether that's face-to-face over coffee or these days on Zoom. And I like to find out about them and their industry. Now, this is something that you can do when you are job hunting. You can meet people at conferences and you can say, hey, what you're doing sounds really interesting. Can I come and talk to you sometime? And what you can do is talk to that person and again, gently sort of interview them, but you can ask them questions like, well, I don't know very much about the accounting industry. How does it work? What kind of things do you find frustrating or exciting? Do you know anyone who is hiring in your industry? What kind of skills are in demand these days? Now, this is called an informational interview, right? And it's a perfectly legitimate tactic. You can do this with quite senior people. You could say, can I come and talk to you? I'd really like to do a little informational interview and find out about your industry. And you notice that the thing you're never doing is asking that person, have you got a job? Please give me a job. Right? Because if they do have a job and they like you, they will tell you. Right? But what you really want them to do is to pass you on to their contacts. And there's two questions that you always ask in this process. One is this: what do I have to do to be taken seriously in this industry? Do I need specific qualifications, specific experience? How do I gain that? And the second one is, do you know anyone else I can talk to? If you do, and you say, oh yes, you should talk with Y, is it okay if I cold call Y and say, I've just been talking to so-and-so, right? Can I use your name in that contact? That's an informational interview. Sometimes you want to call new people that you think you might have supposing you've missed someone at the conference, there was someone you really wanted to talk to, and you might try and cold call them. How do you do that? Well, what you do is you phone up at the right time, which is generally not 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, but it might be 3 o'clock on a Friday. You ask them if they've got a little time to talk. You say how much time you'd like to take, and you always remind them when you've taken that time. And it may be that your first question is, can I schedule a chat with you? I was really sorry that I didn't meet you at the conference. I heard your talk at the conference, and I'd really like to follow up on that. Now, sometimes you can do this by email, but if you do that, most of the time, you probably won't get a reply, right? It'll go into the junk folder. If you actually phone people up and you're polite and nice, you have a chance. Now, there's a couple of tricks you can do. One is, when you're on the telephone, stand up. I can't stand up now because I would disappear off the top of the screen, but if I did, you would hear my voice change because my chest expands. And it really does make your voice sound more alive. If you ever have telephone interviews, it's a tip, stand up and do it, right? And then the other thing is, you always send a thank you email to the person that you've called. And of course, you always send a thank you email to the person if you've actually managed to get an informational interview with them. Now, if the person that you're trying to speak with is a very important, very senior person, then you won't be able to get through to them. What you do then is you call that organization and say, can you tell me who is the PA or the executive admin or the chief of staff of Dr. X, where Dr. X is the important person? And when you get through, you probably will get through to that person, and you must be extremely nice and polite to that person. You can never be too nice to the PA of an important person, right? Because their job is to keep idiots away from their boss. And you have a conversation which you might have scripted, and you say, I heard Dr. X say at a conference that his company are actively looking for partnerships in universities. I'm working at a university and we've got some innovative stuff, and I think Dr. X might be interested. Could we schedule a meeting? And the response, if you've been nice and you're not a complete idiot, will be, yes, we could do that, but could you send me an email? Could you send us an email describing this? Okay. And what you want is permission from the PA or the EA to send an email. And they will probably say, send it to Dr. X because I'll see everything that they get. But you also will get the PA's personal email themselves, and you'll copy it into them. And if for any reason they don't respond, what you don't do is hassle Dr. X. You go back to the PA and say, oh, I'm terribly sorry, I've not heard back from Dr. X. It might have gone in my spam folder. Could you check for me, please? And if you keep doing that, then you may well get an interview with that important person. Be prepared to be scheduled at odd times. I was one time trying to set up a series of interviews with the heads of America, the head of management operations at American Express. And I was told, yeah, can you call him on this number at 6 p.m. Tucson time? That's Arizona, which was 2 a.m. in the morning. And I did call him at 2 a.m. in the morning. And at the end of it, he said, hey, gee, you're from Scotland, aren't you? And I said, yes, that's correct. Wow, what time is it there? So it's 2 a.m. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll get, so I sort of got him, in debt. He felt like he owed me a favor. I mean, the fact was I worked from home and I could just roll back into bed. Now, this all sounds a bit difficult. I don't know how, if you feel intimidating, but it really does work. Okay. This is an email I had last summer from the talk, from a talk that I gave, the one I'm going to give to you in a few weeks' time. I gave this in April 2020. This is a young student from Edinburgh who actually tried informational interviews. I was intrigued by your informational interviews idea. I gave it a try. I reached out to a few people in the medtech industry and they actually did get back in touch. I had some very interesting conversations, and one of those interesting conversations has now materialized into a 3-month placement at the company. Okay, so this technique does work. It takes practice. You get better and better at it, but this is how I have managed to find a job, if you like, not once, not twice, but 500 different jobs in the last 25 years, right? That's the way I do it, and I'm sharing my success with you. If you want to practice your self-confidence, if you want to become more self-confident, just practice. Sit in front of a mirror, practice saying, hello, I'm so-and-so, right? The mirror both lets you look at your body language and reflects your sound. If you're an introvert, pull yourself out of your comfort zone. Work with some art students, work with some drama students, have singing lessons. In particular, do some team-based voluntary work. We heard earlier about the necessity for building up experience, and one of the ways that you can do that is by doing voluntary work. Work with a charity, work with a scout, something like that. When you're at networking meetings, take it slowly, build up your targets. At the last meeting, I talked to 3 people. Let's try and take 4 people. Exercise is good. And all those things that I've just said, if you're unemployed, really, really do them. Slide about what you need to be employable. That's the slide about the Belbin test. And this is the final slide about some specific things you can do. You follow those links. And that's the end.